Let's talk about the 6 lines of attraction. And this is a tricky sphere because it is ruled by your desire and your emotions, and your sexuality is involved. And you throw in the law of attraction, which is mistold by lots of people. And there's a lot of preconceptions, a lot of energy going on here. And so I want to try to break it down the best I can. That said, it is a complex one for sure. The life force that we feel from desire, the drive to do things, is the same drive that is tied to our sexuality, our drive to survive as humans and as a species. And on the flip side of that coin, we have the fear of death, or I prefer the term the fear of non-existence, which is another huge negative, quote unquote, or maybe shadow driver of our attraction and what we're calling in to us. Basically, our DNA puts out an energy, an aura through our emotions, through how we show up in the world. And then stuff comes into us. And this sphere on either side is the pathway of dharma on one side and the pathway of karma on the other. And dharma is what your soul is here to do this go around. And karma are the people, places, things that get called into your life so that you can fulfill your dharma, fulfill your higher purpose. And how you respond to what is coming in via this sphere of attraction, that is how we gradually raise our frequency over time. I've done a full video on the law of attraction, so I'm not going to get into that. I'll link it. But it's way off from what most people say. So here in the 6 lines, each line has a theme, which is what this is, and then an accompanying state of being, which I'll go ahead and say as we get going. So the first one is sterility, fertility, and the theme here is empty and wholesome. So even though these words are tied intimately to sexuality, I don't want you to go there right away. Instead, think more about seeing life as fertile ground. And we have 2 responses in any situation. We can choose to see that this is something that we can use for our growth, or we can go into a victim mindset and think, man, I'm on this land that has absolutely no opportunity, and we start to spiral down into our shadow selves. But there's always a fertile response to whatever comes your way, and that doesn't matter if it's spiritually, financially, in relationship, emotionally, sexually. There's always something that you can do that brings you closer to your higher purpose. And sterility has this empty feeling to it. And that empty feeling blocks flow. It doesn't allow you to see the opportunity. It doesn't allow you to see a possibility to move forward. And depression and exhaustion are born from that empty, sterile feeling. You get this place where it's like, there's no meaning, it doesn't matter, I'm doomed. So why bother? It's nihilism at its core. And the modern world has a panacea of different ways to distract us from that feeling of emptiness. You name it and we got it. Could be drugs, could be sex, could be shopping, could be exercise. There's so many different ways that when we start to feel that emptiness, we start to feel that discomfort, that anxiety, we distract ourselves away from it instead of walking towards it. And relationships start to die without a feeling of fulfillment, without a feeling of fertility, or without a feeling of wholesomeness. And as a first line, you need this passion in your relationships. You need, like, your sexuality is your creative juice. So the sterile feeling, the empty feeling is not only going to affect your relationships, but it's going to drastically affect your output, your creativity into the world. And if the relationship is fading, if you're in a relationship that feels like there is some separateness that happens, that feels like it is infertile, that feels like it's a barren landscape, that is your perception. Remember that every relationship is attracted into your life for a reason. And so it could be, I'm not saying that relationship needs to stay together, although I think a lot of times we run sooner than we should. I know I'm guilty of that for sure. But it is teaching you something. And so just turning off from it is closing you off to what the universe is trying to show you. There's always a way to respond to something in a higher frequency, and that's what your target is. So you can leave the relationship or you can stay, but just be sure that the leaving isn't running. Be sure that you've taken in all the lessons that you can take in, or else the cycle starts again and the universe will serve up the same things over and over again. Remember that shadows need to be embraced and transformed mutually in relationship. So we need to make sure that you have a relationship in which you can go to your partner and talk about the issues that you have and bring to them the issues that they have, and that each of you can hold the higher purpose, the higher vision, the higher person behind these shadow issues that are coming up in each moment. There's always going to be shadow in every relationship and every being until we hit that true Siddhic state. And that's rare. That's few and far between for somebody to live in those frequencies. It's not rare for them to show up, but they come and they go. They flitter in, they flitter out. And when they flitter out, our shadow creeps back up on us. It's part of the game. And even if somebody else appears to be more fertile ground, a lot of the times it's because you haven't seen the whole person yet. And when you see the whole person, you'll understand that there are parts of them that also trigger the same things in you, because it's not about them. It's about you. It's always about you. I don't care what line it is. The lesson is always for you. You can't run from it. And relationships end up becoming wholesome, becoming fertile with work, with acceptance. The next person's not going to be a shortcut, although it might look that way when we first start going. All right, second line is lust and passion. So lust at the shadow frequency, passion at the gift. And the associated is inadequate and liberated. So desire runs deep, and it shows in lots of different ways and comes across in lots of different frequencies. So it could be internal, it could be self-deprecating, it could be external, blaming, which is more of a second line vibe. So if you're a 2, you'll probably identify with that one a little bit more. It also comes in many different frequencies, right? It can be sort of like manipulative and slide it under the rug, or I can be aggressive right in your face and let you know that it's coming. So there's lots of different desires, but there is one desire, one drive that really overdoes or overshadows all of the others, and that is the desire to mate. And that's a pure desire, right? That is something that is born into our DNA and our current vehicles of being right now. Where we get into trouble is when that desire merges or gets entangled with another desire, which is the desire to decrease or escape suffering. When that happens, then a lot of stuff gets projected onto the other person. We're not willing to look at ourselves. We're not willing to understand that relationships are supposed to have ups and downs, that our lives are supposed to have ups and downs. I was watching a podcast the other day with the guy from Human Garage, if you've ever heard of it. He does a lot of fascial work, and he was talking to, I don't know who, looked like he was dressed in monk clothing, but they were talking about happiness and pain. And basically the monk was like, I don't understand why people are shying away from what we would classify as negative emotions. They're not negative emotions. They're part of the journey. They're part of the path. And automatically, if you judge half of the things that you feel as negative, you just gave away half your life, essentially. So escaping suffering or trying to escape suffering is what drives the shadow behaviors. It's what causes us to distract ourselves. It's what causes us to go out and engage in the addiction cycle. It puts us in the pain and the pleasure cycle where we're just swinging from pleasure to pain and pleasure to pain instead of being able to find the middle way, as it's called in the Tao Te Ching. And many relationships start with sexual desire, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, when you start to mix in a romantic projection, an unrealistic projection that was given to us by Hollywood or by the movies or by a book, then we start to get ourselves into trouble. When you see your relationship as a way to escape your suffering, then we start to get into trouble. And lust is just sexual desire plus fear. You add those two together and that is lust. It is taking action for something because you're scared. Lust has this, like straight up lust has this animal purity to it. It's like goes back millions, hundreds of millions of years. It's bred into us. However, when it is mixed with the unconscious mind and that starts to take over, you become blind to yourself and blind to others. And then we act with lust and don't care about the outcomes. And that is when lust gets us into trouble. We're different from the other animals, to the millions of years of evolution that I just talked about, in that there are psychological consequences to our actions. And so we need to take a breath, take a step back and look at what our lust is doing. Do we have another commitment that we're supposed to be honoring that this lust is going to affect? That's my sphere of attraction, the 29th gene key: half-heartedness, commitment, devotion. And it has gotten me into a lot of trouble in my life. So twos are going to use sex as a distraction from feeling the fear, the anxiety that I talked about earlier. A distraction from the suffering. And so that's what you really need to be careful of as a second line. But there is no escape. There is only acceptance, which is one of the gene keys. I believe it's the 25th gene key. And what we talk about in that gene key is a 3-step process: allow, accept, and embrace. That is the pathway to letting your suffering come into you and being a guide, allowing it to show you the work that you need to do and the new direction that you need to take. That's what we can do. We can't sleep with somebody to take it away. We can't yell at somebody to take it away. We can't distract ourselves away from it. And the inability to escape from the fear is what leads us to the inadequacy that is paired with this lust that I talked about earlier. It's like fear has too much. It takes over what we're doing, or there's no feeling to it at all. Either way, we have this inadequate feeling, like we can't control ourselves, or like we're separate from the world. We're not enough. We can't engage. And twos hide behind sexuality. They use it as a temporary escape, and that is what stops connection with people, and it leads to blame of other people. So you need to find that inadequacy as you feel as a second line. And you need to own it, and you need to know that it's yours, and you need to gently make sure that you can see it in your day-to-day life. That's always the step one, is see it. And you don't need to do anything with it. That's what allow means. It means to see it and let it be, and just Don't turn away from it. Don't run in fear. Don't be angry or upset. It's just let it be. And eventually we'll come to a place of acceptance of that thing. And then we can embrace it and start to use it as fuel in a different direction. That same energy of inadequacy shows up as love and passion as we're able to use it as something better. So follow your passion as a second line. And that is what is gradually going to raise your frequency higher and higher over time. Once you plug into it, just continue to see what life throws your way and continue to do the things that bring that fire to you. And then you'll be able to see and feel and experience love in just about everything you do. All right, moving on now to the third line. We've got promiscuity and playfulness. And the other keynotes here are melodramatic and adventurous. So there are two possibilities for this third line. There's two possibilities for all of these lines. And there's also two possibilities for each of the gene keys. There is a repressive side and there's a reactive side. So at the shadow frequency for this third line, you could be reactive, which is expressive and promiscuous, or you could pull back in and you would be repressive and locked up. And typically the people that are repressive, sexually repressed, locked, had an experience early on in their sexuality that just leads to a freezing. And that's a hard thing to overcome. This is one of the only places in the Gene Keys text where Richard Rudd, the founder of the Gene Keys, basically says, if this is you, you might consider going to get help from a trauma specialist, because when this happens, it can be very deep and it can impact a lot of different things and run in ways that are beyond the scope of the Gene Keys. And I think this is a great place for me to talk about who I am and in talking about these things. I am just a person who's studied the Gene Keys for a few years, and I'm not a Gene Keys coach. I don't help other people with their Gene Keys directly. I've not even done all the coursework or dug in nearly as far as I could on what the Gene Keys are. So please don't look at me as somebody who is leading you or guiding you along. I'm just sharing what I'm seeing, and it seems like it's helpful for some people, but always take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. Always make sure you follow your own intuition. It's one thing for me to say things. It's another thing for you to feel it in your body. And that's really what the Gene Keys are all about. So just keep that in mind as I'm going through this stuff. So on the expressive side of this third line, you know these people instantly. Promiscuous and melodramatic. These are your drama kings and drama queens. These are the people that need to be the center of attention all the time. They're constantly bouncing around from a relationship to a relationship, and it seems like there's just a constant barrage of insanity happening in their lives. Unlike twos though, the three isn't after the sexual act itself. The threes are in it for the drama of the chase. They love the process. And from an open-hearted point, or they'll stay open-hearted until the point of commitment, basically. So they'll have a great relationship with somebody, and then when things start to get a little bit more serious, third lines are going to turn and run, because remember, they're all about new experiences, new things, and that's part of their life plan. And it can really have a negative impact on the other person. And this is all about your frequency, and the thoughts and feelings and emotions that you're putting out into the world are going to come back to you. And so that cycle can and will continue if you're not aware of it. And this is a pattern that is learned through pop culture, right? Like just turn on any reality TV show and you will see this line front and center, because they are great for a drama. And then that reinforces the pattern in the person. And unfortunately, as a collective, we are stuck at the shadow frequency. And there's not too many examples of a healthy, playful, adventurous third line out there because it doesn't make for as good a TV. So because this is a learned pattern, be kind to yourself. What you really want as a third line is a deep relationship, but you just keep getting in your own way. So if you have to make that pattern known. And when you make it known, eventually, given enough time through that allow, accept, embrace process, it's going to start to change. You need humor as a third line because it's going to take time for you to learn that lessons. You're gonna have a lot of ups and downs. And in order for your frequency to stay high, you've got to just learn to laugh at yourself. I feel a lot of this third line energy, although I only have a 1 in my profile because I'm largely a 6th line in many of my spheres. I'm a 6th line. And the third line is kind of how 6 lines live their lives for the first like 30 or 35 years. So although I don't have them, I acted this way quite a bit. So we need to recognize that we don't have to buy into the drama. You don't have to lean into it. You don't have to create it. You don't have to engage with it if it comes your way. Third lines have a hard time understanding that. They think that they need to react or need to respond. You don't. You can go inside of yourself and decide what you want to do there. So just own that and be playful and begin to interact with the world in a different way. Your sexuality as a third line is going to be kind of experimental and adventurous, but not at the expense of the hearts that are involved in the process. So just keep that in mind. You need to begin to see the opening and the closing of your heart. And you have to own that there is nothing to do about that. We are not in control, right? I just did the 6 lines of SQ and we're not in control of our heart opening and closing. What we need to focus on is our IQ and our EQ, how we're responding intellectually and emotionally to things. And over time, our heart will stay open for longer periods of time. But as a third line, you just need to own that it's not something that you're doing. It's not something that somebody else is doing. You don't need to act on it necessarily, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And that allows you to stay in a relationship, to stay engaged with something for the first time in your life. When you see that it wasn't your fault, that it wasn't somebody else's fault, and you just breathe through it and you continue on instead of running. And you'll find such deep peace in that. Every line needs to learn that, but this is a third line specialty. A third line, like one of the big reasons that you're here, one of the big things you're here to learn. Nonetheless, all the other 5 lines also need to understand the heart opening, heart closing process. So this is about a victim state versus owning what is happening ultimately. And when you get to the city, you get to be always open. But until then, you're gonna pop in and out of, I'm a victim. The key isn't to not feel that way, because that takes a lot of time. The key is knowing that you don't need to respond. All right, moving on to the 4th line, we've got frigidity and romance. Distant and intimate are the ways of being in the world.